again. Thank you all very much for joining us. We have no apologies, I take it?
We have apologies from Mark Ryder.
Oh, we have one from Mark now. Okay, thanks. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary or other interests relevant to this meeting which anyone wants to make? No hands raised, thank you. So we will move on to the minutes of the last meeting, which was of the 7th of November, in which we recognise the passing of Bob Meacham, of course. Does anyone have any concerns about those minutes?
May I just
comment?
Is it just a comment, Chair, is that on matters arising from the previous minutes, page 2, we did discuss developing a new reserve strategy.
Yes.
Just wondering if we had progress on that.
I think that's a good question. Who would like to comment on that? Rob Powell?
Yes, the new reserve strategy has been approved by Cabinet and was part of the budget resolution in February.
And so, how come you didn't know about that, Councillor Cargill? One wonders.
Correct. I just didn't notice it. Sorry.
Okay.
Chair, it was one of many appendices in a very large bundle pre-coronavirus. So it's there. Obviously, we're looking at reserves very carefully at the moment in light of the financial implications of the pandemic.
Well, yes, and there are maybe some things that we should talk about on our reserves and our cash position when we come to the purple papers at the end. I don't think they should be for public consumption, but I think it is worth touching on just a couple of things. Are there any other aspects of the minutes of the meeting which anyone would like to comment on? Are there any matters arising which aren't going to be on the agenda which anyone would like to raise apart from that point of Councillor Cargill's? I've got one, and that does relate to the fact that we did agree last time that we wanted to look for another independent member of this committee. I wonder whether someone has got any news on whether we're pursuing that or whether that's on hold. Anyone want to speak to that?
Chair, I can come in on that if that's helpful.
Good morning, Sarah. Yes, thanks.
Good morning. We have prepared the packs ready for the advert to go out, but that was put on pause during the pandemic. So we are planning to restart that with a view to appointing a further independent member.
You are planning to what? You're going to wait till September, something like that, when things are settled down a bit?
I think in the early autumn would be a good time to start that advertisement process.
Okay,
so yes, around September, October time.
Okay, yeah, I think it'd be good to have one in by the end of the year.
Noted, Chair.
Fine. Any other matters arising before we go on to the agenda of substance? Right. So the next item is the draft annual governance statement, which is in your pack, pages 9 to 36. So I think my question is, do any of the officers want to speak to it by words of introduction, particularly on whether there are any significant changes since the last time we looked at it?
I'm happy to introduce it.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'm Chris Norton, a finance manager with the County Council. So this report is the annual governance statement. Just a few things I'd highlight about it. It's in draft form, so it won't be finalised until it goes to Council in October. One of the key changes from last year, you'll notice, is that it has regard to COVID, and there was a specific guidance that required local authorities to make sure that their governance statements did this. You'll notice that rather than take the approach of sticking a section in called COVID, we've integrated issues to do with COVID throughout the report where they're relevant, so you'll see them peppered through the report. There have been governance challenges through the year, and you'll notice in section 5 that those are highlighted, but we have found no significant governance issues or failures to report. And we've included within this report in Appendix 3 the definitions of what we need to be looking out for in terms of significant governance issues.
Yeah.
Within the local authority, assistant directors have been signing off statements of assurance about having regard to managing risks through the year. So that's going on in the background. This report was reviewed by an evaluation panel made up of a number of senior officers and has also been reviewed by statutory officers. And at the end of the document, you'll see the governance action plan for the coming year. That's all I have to say by way of introduction. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Thanks. Yes, I think one of the advantages of having something like COVID-19, it rather jumps out at you when you very quickly look at each of the pages. I think there's barely a page where COVID-19 isn't mentioned, isn't there? Which is good, as you say. It's become embedded in our culture. Okay, I'd like to open it up. Does anyone have anything that they would like to say about this at this point in time? Councillor Gifford, you're at the top of my list.
Thank you. Yes, it's the climate change element that I'm concerned that doesn't get lost in terms of and on page 17 it refers to the COVID-19 response and recovery activity as accelerating the pace of change, and I hope that I know that we've got climate change earlier on in the document because we did actually declare a climate emergency last year. I just wanting reassurance that that is not something that's getting not lost but not going too far down the agenda.
To whom should your concern be brought? To whose attention should your concern be brought, do you think?
I suppose I mean, climate change, like anything, has financial implications. So possibly Rob Powell might be able to help on that.
Is everyone happy that we give Councillor Gifford our support for that? Councillor Cargill?
Yeah, fine. Sorry, is another item, just a little question.
Okay. Fine. I think we should make that part of our notes. Thank you, Councillor Gifford. So now let's take separate points. Councillor Cargill.
Thank you. It's just a question for officers, really. We've now gone through, and we are still going through, the COVID-19 crisis. We've had to restructure, reorganise, repurpose, whatever you want to say, the way we work. And we're now embedding some of that into our future documents and strategies, etc. What I'm asking is, are some of these things specific to COVID-19, or are some of them generic, which can come into play in the event of another crisis of whatever it may be? We just don't know what's going to come around the corner, of course. So in other words, is this lessons learned and we can embed it in our systems for future?
I guess the implication of this draft government statement is this will remain current until it is decided that it is no longer relevant. But at this point in time, we have no idea how long that might be. So I think we would take the advice of officers on that, wouldn't we? Rob Powell, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think Councillor Cargill and Councillor Gifford have raised good questions, and my answer probably covers both off. So we're obviously responding to COVID, but we are doing things either more quickly than we had originally planned that we're already in train, or we are benefiting from some of the earlier transformation work in our response. And so while COVID is the trigger, I would hope that the changes that we're putting in place would put us in a much better place to respond to any future situation of similar gravity. And there are a number of opportunities to embed more modern and productive ways of working on the back of COVID, despite all of the damage and the downside risk. Member working groups are looking at all of these things, both the organisational impacts, the economic place shaping impacts, climate change impacts, health, social care, wellbeing impacts, and sort of community and voluntary sector impacts as we speak, to make recommendations for a recovery plan that Cabinet will consider in September. So certainly I can give Councillor Gifford some reassurance that climate change is a central part of that and will be a central part of the recovery plans, because I don't think climate change and COVID are separate. I think they're interrelated issues with profound long-term implications for the council. So there is a lot of work going on to make sure that we do take the opportunities as well as deal with the future consequences.
Thank you. Councillor Dervitt.
Thank you for that answer, Rob. It's quite a comprehensive answer. It's exactly what I think we want to hear. But I think what we need to note as well is that the first page of this does say annual governance statement. So we will get the chance to revisit this and really check with whether it is going in the right direction, whether we accept all of the changes that are being made, or whether they do need adjustment, and that the system for checking up on that is already in place, and that this committee actually plays quite a good role in monitoring that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Grant, do you want to say something?
Yeah, it's only a quick one, Chair, and I know Sandra's got his hand up, so maybe we'll be saying the same thing. Just to point out to members is that the annual governance statement, whilst it is annual, goes up to the point of when you publish your accounts. So that will be up to September, October. So there will be an expectation that you will, in a way, keep it under review. So if anything happens significant between now and publication of the accounts, there will be opportunity and maybe expectation that you would update it as appropriate, because it takes you up to the point of final publication. I was just going to point that out.
Yes, thanks. Andrew?
I just draw your attention to something new in the report as well. We've included an annual governance action plan within the AGS this time round. Yeah. And that sort of reflects a number of reviews that are going to go on around governance and risk as we move forward. And I think a lot of the COVID experience will be sort of incorporated into that. There's quite a few positives we can take out of the COVID experience in terms of how we manage as an organisation. And I certainly know from conversations with Society of County Treasurer colleagues in other organisations that we seem to have managed this a lot more effectively and had a lot fewer issues, whether it's around cash flow, whether it's around sort of general financial health and decision making and pace of moving things forward. I think it's all been quite positive for Warwickshire. But any opportunity to learn from that and build it back into our day-to-day operations outside of any pandemic or emergency, I think is quite important moving forward.
And as far as all other councils are concerned, of course, I mean, this is our statement of governance, which is valid for the time being. And for the time being, for planning purposes, is generally considered for the next year or so. Councillor Riley?
Thank you, Chair. My question's been answered.
Okay, thank you. Right. So is there anything else that we need to say about the draft annual governance statement, or with the provisos that have been made, can we commend that to the council? Yes, we can commend it to the council. Then I suggest that is what we do. Thank you very much. That takes us on to item 3, which is the external audit report and of the Warwickshire Pension Fund, pages 37 to 88 in your pack. Would an officer like to offer some words of introduction before I ask Grant to speak about key points?
Yes, John, I'm happy to introduce this report.
If you could, Chris, thank you.
So this is the Warwickshire Pension Fund report to do with the external audit plan. Just one bit of context about the pension fund to remind those not familiar with it. The pension fund is responsible for the LGPS funds for about 200 employers, not just Warwickshire County Council. And it's got about 50,000 members. So this report comes in three parts. There's the external audit plan, setting out Grant Thornton's plans for going through the accounts. There's the updated fee letter for this year. You'll notice there's an increase in the fee, but this is having regard to the fact that a few things are quite complicated this year. You'll have seen regard to something called level 3 investments in these reports. This refers to investments that are very difficult to measure. So if you look at things like level 1, that would be something like a listed equity you could buy, you know exactly what it's worth, it's easy to value. Level 3 is very difficult. So that's one thing that's particularly difficult this year because of COVID. You'll also see reference to something called IAS 19. To just clarify, that's an accounting standard to do with calculating employee benefits. And pension funds is a benefit that's a bit more complicated than some others to value. And also the closing year was the 2019 valuation year. So it was a very busy year in that respect. So a lot was going on in the pension fund. There's also a document called a risk assessment. This is a new document, and what this does is set out a number of areas of potential risk where the pension fund has been required to populate that with responses, explaining our position in respect of those risks. So you'll also see in there some reference to COVID. It's had a big impact on markets. The biggest issue for the funds since the lockdown really has been around making sure we've got cash flow to make sure that we can function, because the pension fund in reality is a very long-term entity, and sometimes you'll get swings in the markets as we've been experiencing. But those are the things I would highlight about this report.
Fine, thank you. Grant, over to you.
Right, thanks, Chair.
Sorry, did I miss Councillor Dervitt?
Oh, sorry,
Just hang on. Councillor Dervitt, did I miss something from you there?
I just raised my hand. It's just to raise your awareness that I am on the pension fund investment subcommittee, so I won't comment on this report, just to make sure that there are no accusations of bias or anything.
Thank you, Councillor Dervitt, and we wish you well in your challenging task on that committee. Back to you, Grant.
Right, thank you, Chair. I mean, in terms of the way the agenda structure is today, you've got agenda item 3, which is basically the pension fund, and agenda item 4, which is the county council. What we've decided to split this is Jim will take you through the pension fund report, and then I'll take you through the county council reports. As you were indicating, they are broadly the same number of reports. You've got the audit plan, you've got an addendum, and then you've got an informing risk assessment. And the informing risk assessment is about two-way communication between ourselves as auditors and yourselves as the Audit and Standards Committee. So what I'll do is I'll pass over to Jim to take you through the papers, and then I'll be on hand to answer any questions, and then I'll take you through the County Council papers on the next agenda item.
Okay, thanks. Just before that, Councillor Gifford, do you want to make a comment here?
Yes, I'm also on the investment the pension fund investment subcommittee, but I didn't actually feel that I needed to declare an interest as such. Perhaps Sarah Duxbury could help me on that one. I don't think I have an interest to declare. I mean, obviously I'm on that subcommittee, but it's part and parcel of the county council.
Yeah, if I can come in, Chair, it wouldn't be a matter that you'd be required to disclose in the context of a disclosable pecuniary interest. It's helpful to note, but I think it's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Councillor Horner?
Thanks. I'm on the same committee, but then so the community services know this, so it would be automatically declared. It seems to me that we can comment because, of course, as councillors, we are able to separate our responsibilities.
Yes.
Yeah,
we do have that ability.
It's not a problem. Councillor Davis, you want to come back?
Just to say thank you for that clarity, and I'll carry on as normal then.
Okay, fine. Right, back to Grant Thornton now.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and morning everybody, and thanks to Chris for that overview of the papers. I think he captured some of the key points there. If we could just start on page 41 of your agenda pack, which is titled Introduction and Headlines, and reads as an executive summary of the plan, and then I'll also draw out a few of the key areas in the body of the report. Right. So, in terms of significant audit risks highlighted in our original audit plan, which was written prior to COVID-19, these are consistent with the prior period and our management override of controls. This is a risk that's presumed to be present in all entities that we audit and is dictated by the auditing standards. So I'll work to address this risk, specifically focus on journal entries and how these can be used as a mechanism to misreport the performance or the position of the fund. This work will also focus on key areas of management judgment in the accounts. We also identified a significant risk in relation to level 3 investments. As Chris mentioned, these are investments which are valued with very little or no observable inputs, and therefore present a higher risk of misstatement in the accounts. So hopefully members will be familiar with our approach to materiality in performing our audit, but just to remind you, we've determined that the net assets of the fund are the most appropriate benchmark to calculate the level by which, in our judgment, a misstatement in the accounts would be material to a user's understanding. This equates to approximately 20 million and is in line with the prior period, which is just below 1% of the net assets of the fund from the prior year. We're also required to report any errors noted for our work to members which are above our trivial threshold, and this has been calculated at 1 million, which is also consistent with the prior period. Just quickly then, finally on that page, in terms of audit logistics, we'll speak a bit more to this as we've got a progress report coming up later on in the agenda, but we completed our planning and interim visits earlier in the year, and the team are currently completing the final accounts audit as we speak. The fees for the pension fund audit, as agreed with Rob as the Strategic Director for Resources, are 22,647, and they're set out again in a bit more detail in our fee and scope letter, which is next on the agenda. And just finally then, on that page, as a firm and individuals, we're required to consider our independence of the pension fund, can confirm that we've not identified any issues which may impair this, and therefore we're able to express an objective opinion on the financial statements. So that was all I was going to say on the executive summary. In terms of other areas of this report,
if I could just ask, in terms of your introduction, presumably all of this pension audit work will now be done electronically and remotely, and you won't have to have any physical visits to Warwickshire?
That's correct, yeah, and say we'll talk a bit more about that in our Cove paper. We are currently completely working remotely, by remote means, so from home, as we understand the pension fund and the council staff are also, and therefore we're having to use more means of communication, such as Microsoft Teams and electronic documentation to support our work.
Well, it's very helpful, of course, because this is a cheaper way of working, and of course I'm sure that'll be reflected in the fees.
Yes, yeah, we are trying to work within the fee envelopes agreed today.
Good. Okay. Let's move on.
No problem. As I said, the body of the report really just goes on to flesh out the executive summary, but the only other point I wanted to draw out to members' attention, which is a little bit different this year, is that the financial statements are actually being subject to a hot review, which is detailed on page 42 of the agenda pack. So that's whereby, due to the high the nature of the client and the risk associated, every 3 years our technical team will have a review, an in-depth review of the financial statements, and we'll be sure to feed back any findings from that in our audit findings report later on in the year. And that was all I proposed to say on the audit plan for the pension fund, Chair, but happy to take any questions on that.
I guess the first question that I've got is that given that Warwickshire is now part of a much bigger pension arrangement with a number of other local authorities, is there a danger that there are far too many audits being done and are duplicating each other?
Do you want me to answer that? I think, Chair, you might be slightly confusing matters. All pension funds are required to pool their funds, but you're still acting independently as a fund. So you will be pooling your investments with other pension funds, but that actually you're still a standalone body in terms of the audit. So I don't think there's more, and actually what we are doing as auditors through the NAO is coordinating with the pools to get the relevant information as efficiently and effectively as possible. So the pool will be providing the auditors of separate funds with the information they need, or hopefully the information we need to get the assurance. So I don't think there's too many audits being undertaken. You're still a standard, well, an administrative authority, a standalone administrative authority upon which we have to audit the pension fund. So I think there's only more going on in that. So I think it's not quite the same in terms of where you pooled your investments and actually the audit approach or the audit requirements are we still audit the pension fund.
Okay. I was thinking particularly about if it were like a master trust, of course, as soon as one sees pension assets into a master trust, then the master trust is audited, but the individual components of it are not.
Yes, I think actually the pool itself will be audited at some point, I think, and the assets held within that pool will be subject to audit, and we can take assurance on the valuation from that pool. Now, that if it progresses over a number of years, I think you could see that simplifying, but currently you would still be a separate pension fund, and actually we would treat the pool, I suppose, akin to another investment manager. But yes, you should be reducing, I suppose, in that essence, the number of investment managers, which should hopefully make a more efficient audit going forward.
Okay, Councillor Cargill.
Thank you, Chair. Right, crystal ball time, guys. In the report you mentioned about it's too early to reliably measure the impact of the UK's exit from the European Union, and I fully get that. But have you any speculative or preemptive thoughts on what could happen? I mean, it's going to be an impact to UK PLC, but what about WCC PLC? Are there things there that would impact us significantly in this area, in our pension fund?
Right. Okay. I can't. So I've got to be careful here. I clearly cannot give you financial advice. In terms of the pension fund itself, you just had the 2019 triennial valuation. The guidance that I think has just recently come out from the Scheme Advisory Board is to pension funds is not to revisit that valuation. Therefore, effectively, and I will pass over to Rob and to Andrew after this. Your contributions are set for 3 years, and that will be the same for all of the employers within the fund. So I don't think there will be, in that sense, the way that the fund will go forward, an impact. I think as your auditor, we will be asking questions around, I suppose, in a way to strengthen the covenants of all those employers within that and the contribution flows. And I think, as Chris and Andrew as alluded to, you've already been looking at the anticipated cash flows. But if you think, I think within your fund, the majority of the employers within your fund will be other local councils. I don't think we're anticipating that those covenants will be or the contributions will drop off, if you know what I mean. So I don't think there'll be any particular impact upon that. And I think there'll be a reset in 3 years' time around the impact of maybe COVID-19 and or Brexit might have had upon the overall funding of the pension fund.
Is that all right, Councillor Cargill?
Yeah, very good answer. Yeah, good answer. Thank you very much.
Councillor Horner?
Thanks very much, Chair. I was just initially going to comment on the fact that the pool really is just a fund of funds. It's no different from us using, one of the Schroders or any of the other fund managers. So we treat them very similarly to that. So there's no issue there. However, a couple of issues. One, which in fact Councillor Cargill just raised, valuation. Valuation was actually quite a beneficial. I think the market was doing quite well. It obviously has bounced back a lot since the epidemic crash. But if there's a problem, I suspect the least of our worries will be being slightly underfunded more than we are at the moment. So funding might drop down in, theoretically down to about 70 or 80%, 60 or 70%, which we've been there before. The real concern I've got about the pension fund is I noticed this week, end of the week, government or Treasury has now talked about a fix for the McLeod problem, which is going to cost HMG for its unfunded pensions about 17 billion. The public sector have very similar issues, local government, and as a result, I suspect we're going to be hit quite hard having to re-establish the funding. And that may be more important than any valuation impact. I don't know what the auditors think on that, because that will affect the county council as a risk.
I will start from your response to that and talk to both maybe Rob and Chris. Your actuaries, I think, have already begun to factor in what they thought the remedy for McLeod was. Certainly, MHCLG has now published its proposed remedy or consultation on the 17th of July. So, I mean, we are working that through. So there probably is already an element within your valuation. I mean, I'm happy for Rob and Chris to come in around that. So we are still trying to work our way through that. I think this is just a risk that all pension funds, because there are other court cases coming through. There's another one called Godwin that is coming through the system as well. But I think, yes, we need to look at that remedy. You're right. I think my understanding was, the impact is already in the financial. It might be about maybe $500 million nationally additional, but we need to work that one through. And we will certainly be speaking to, as auditors, we have our own auditors expert and PwC review the LGPS and all the actuaries' assumptions around these elements for us, and we get a report from them. So I think we're there being asked to revisit what the remedy or the consultation that came out last week would impact upon the assumption that you've already got within your valuation. So I'm hoping, I haven't looked at the detail yet, that it's already to a certain extent within some of the assumptions, and therefore the remedy itself hopefully won't make a material impact. But of course, you can spread that over a number of years as well.
Mr. Grant, if I can assist on that.
Can I go to Andrew Felton first? Is that all right?
I think Chris was going to respond to the question.
Oh, Chris. Okay, Chris, over to you.
And then I'll come in with a separate point.
So just Grant on how the pension funds have in regard to McLeod. So in the valuation review, we look at a timeline of 19 years and getting to fully funded between now and 19 years in the future. And because you can't predict anything with certainty, the actuaries apply a probability. So we will say we're looking to have a 70% probability of becoming fully funded in 19 years or something of that nature. How we've had regard to McLeod is that probability of reaching full funding in 19 years was increased by 5 or 10%. I can't tell you which off the top of my head, but that's how we've built McLeod into the assumptions within the pension fund valuation at the moment.
So that just means the deficit repair period goes from 19 years to 21 years or something like that?
It could in effect have the same effect.
Yeah. Okay. Andrew, did you want to come in?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to offer some assurance. I suppose the triennial valuation goes through quite a comprehensive risk modelling. And whilst it wasn't exactly the same as a COVID type scenario, there were scenarios similar to COVID within the risk modelling that the actuaries did. So the rates that were set this time around for the 3 years actually included an element of risk profile for this type of thing anyway. And as has already been said, because investments are thought of on a long-term basis, we wouldn't react to short-term issues like this because the market will recover at some point over the life of the 19 years we're talking about. So I think from that point of view, we're probably safe this stage. In terms of the at-risk employers that somebody mentioned, and just keeping and monitoring those, there is a list of I suppose organisations that are of concern, and those are regularly monitored. I mean, as an example, without going into the details, one organisation we've just taken on the liability of as a council to try and mitigate that risk moving forward. There are others that are under review, and we constantly in dialogue with them to just make sure that if they are getting into financial difficulty and can't repay, that we have sort of provision and ways of managing that, particularly with the larger organisations that may have sponsored them or guaranteed them into the fund in the first place.
And just how many other organisations are there, if you could give us a reminder, that participate in our pension fund?
It's 200 and something. Somebody quoted.
Yeah.
200.
And is there one single person who has been asked to keep these all under review?
The pension team do that basically. We've got a pension investment team and a pensions admin team. Between them, they monitor those things on behalf of the fund, basically.
So we can be assured that every single participant in our pension fund is being closely monitored in these difficult times.
Yes. Yeah.
Can we?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Fine. One of the things which is a general audit point on the pension fund, this is for the pension fund, and the audit period will presumably close at the end of March with it. Do you have to say something in your audit about any significant changes which have taken place since the end of March? And if so, what would you be saying?
We don't have to specific. What we would expect is we're in the financial statements. There is you can put post balance sheet events and they can be adjusting or non-adjusting. So they wouldn't automatically get referred to within our audit opinion. I think we would be discussing that with Chris and the team around, one of the elements you might want to look at is if the asset valuations, as has been alluded to, have bounced back significantly, that might be a non-adjusting event that you wish to allude to in your financial statements. We're not necessarily expecting those, and I think for your fund, what we might be seeing in other funds where you might see us making specific reference to is if you held direct property, so if you were rather than through pooled funds, because then what we are seeing is some what we would call as auditors material uncertainties or valuation uncertainties, where actually valuers are saying we've done a professional job, but given COVID-19, we think there are some material uncertainties in the valuation. So some of those we might see flow through into the financial statements. So I don't think you'd automatically in our report. We might put it into our audit findings report, but yes, we would expect you to keep it under review to see if we would see as any significant things that will go into the financial statements. Because primarily the financial statements are looking as at the end of March, but you might want to say a reader, well, has anything changed significantly that you might need to be aware of that wouldn't affect the balance sheet date then, but which we believe as readers you probably ought to be aware of. So I think we'd expect that more for your accounts. We wouldn't necessarily make a specific reference to it in our audit opinion per se.
Okay. So are there any other things, Grant Thornton, which you'd like to draw to our attention at this point on the plan or on the risk assessment?
Well, I don't think it's on the plan. I think Jim's not taking it, but I think just to highlight, I think one of the key issues for us is around those what we call level 3 investments, those ones as Jim's alluded to, the heart of value. Although I think we are generally seeing that actually those are holding up generally, but it might be some of those where in terms of the property funds that you might see that they might have dips. But overall, what I can say is having looked at a draft number of accounts already, your pension fund and actually the drop you've seen in asset valuations is consistent with what we're seeing across the sector as a whole. And broadly, what we are seeing is I think the assets valuations sort of holding up compared to last year, a little bit down, but nothing really sort of going off of a cliff, which probably just reflects the COVID-19 position as at the end of March.
And it isn't a new issue either, is it? I mean, this is an issue we had last year.
No, and I think it's one of those conversations that we are actually having is the valuation any different, in many ways to what you would normally expect in a pension fund, whereas always, because all pension fund valuations are estimates at the year end. And I think it's just that uncertainty that COVID has brought in, because effectively it was mid-March, effectively when lockdown, so it's sort of just covered the financial year. So what we are looking at is what is the impact, and I think we might not see that for a few years yet to see what the actual long-term impact might be, but primarily our view will be looking at the end of March. So.
Okay. I think we should, do you think we are ready now to talk about fees? Or does anyone want to raise anything else before we talk about fees? Obviously, the big issue on fees is the extent to which we are in the process of developing new ways of working, which make audit easier or more difficult to conduct. And if you could accept that working more electronically and remotely is a cheaper modus operandi, whether we would be reasonable in looking for a reduction in fees.
I suppose I'm going to start there. I mean, I think in terms of we are working remotely, and I think you are right. I think all audit firms are looking to the medium to longer term to whether that be using artificial intelligence or using technology better to audit more remotely. I think there are specific challenges though around auditing remotely. Certainly, from the perspective of proving the authenticity of information that we receive from clients. And our regulator certainly is very keen on what we call it IPE, which is information provided by entity. And there are some things that we can't, whilst we can do it remotely, it can take longer. We can share screens, we can get that. And that is one of the challenges around proving the authenticity of information. I think in overall fees at the moment, I think there's two issues here. One, the longer term maybe efficiency of audit using technology, and certainly as a firm we're investing in that, and hopefully that will come through. And then it has to be balanced against the challenges, which are primarily what you're seeing in both the pension fund letter and the main audit letter around the challenges across that the regulator apply to every firm around making sure that improving the trust, I suppose, in auditors and in the work that they are doing. And hence, a lot of the fee increases that you're seeing are linked into what we would say is raising the bar on quality, and then looking specifically, certainly where our regulator has challenged not just us but all firms around specific areas, which is around valuations, I suppose, in pension funds, we ran level 3s, and then when we get onto the council, I was going to say around the valuation of your assets, around the valuation of your pension liability. So whilst I can see your argument around the medium to longer term, I think in the short term, we're also from witnessing from what we're seeing in the NHS, is audits are generally taking longer. Now, I think what we have committed to is to look to keep within the fee envelope for this year. So I accept the point around we're looking to be more efficient from IT. However, I think, and I suppose the savings from our perspective are basically travel costs to be honest, and maybe in the longer term, I suppose if the firm, and how the firm goes in terms of office space, you might be able to then take money out of the overall, I suppose, fixed cost of the firm, but that won't happen overnight. So we are looking at that. But I think in terms of the overall fee, I don't think you will see a short-term reduction, but we would look to keep within the fee envelope this year as best we can.
Okay. Does anyone have anything to say about the audit plan, the risk assessment, or the fee paper? No? Are we happy to move on to the next item on the agenda? I will take that as a yes. So the next item, item 4, of course, is the County Council annual audit plan, also with fee letter and risk assessment. And we're now in pages 89 to 116 of your pack. Would an officer like to introduce it? Rob, you're going to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think it might be appropriate to ask Grant Thornton to introduce the plan and the fee letter rather than officers.
Okay, Grant, over to you.
Right, thank you, Chair. Again, I suppose in a way, I think a lot of the discussions we just had actually are relevant to our approach on the County Council audit. What I will do is as Jim did, is take you to page. Sorry to get the right page. I think it's page 93 in your packs.
Yeah.
Which is the introduction headlines page, and I'll talk mainly to that. I think one thing probably just to pick up, from the pension fund addendum audit, previous agenda item, was we did have an audit plan addendum. The audit plan addendum for the pension fund is similar to the audit plan addendum for the county, and that's just to say that we as a firm have identified a new financial statements level significant risk in relation to COVID-19. So that will be both into the pension fund and into the county council audit. And that was primarily, I have to say, around, which I think what you've picked up to, the move from office-based into home working, and we saw that maybe the risks around changes to operating, governance arrangements and operating arrangements. So at the time we put that in around that there could be an impact around the way the accounts are prepared. So we saw that as a financial statements level risk. And as I say, we've introduced that across all of our clients. So it's not just a Warwickshire specific one. So we will be looking at that. But from our discussions, and we have kept up regular meetings with your finance team, I'm not seeing that as a particular issue that we've identified was a significant risk. Everything we've done to date has suggested that you've transitioned well. The accounts have been produced. And we should be able to get the evidence. So I just flagged that is another significant risk that we brought into the plan. And there are elements within that around valuations we've already touched upon at year end. So we will pick that up. So if I go back to the plan itself on page 93, as I was saying, in many ways, the actual audit plan, it was drafted back in February now. I think it was ready for the March meeting. A lot of the risks that we identified are similar to prior years in terms of those significant risks that we were looking at. So as I picked up earlier when I was talking to agenda item 3, those big estimates that we're looking at in terms of the pension fund net liability, and that does link in, there's a lot of assumptions within that. Valuation of land and buildings, so clearly you'll have valuation experts to help you do that. And then there's the one that we cannot rebut, which is the usual one over the years, is the management override of control, which we address through journals. So we're not proposing, as I say, apart from the COVID-19, those will be the risks that we will be looking at in terms of the 2019-20 financial statements. Just looking at returns of materiality, Jim alluded to in the pension fund, we believe that net assets is the best benchmark to look at. When it comes to the county, we believe that the readers of the accounts will be interested in how the council spent its money. Therefore, we use expenditure as our benchmark. One of the things that we have done as a firm in terms of our bigger audit clients and in relation to that quality bar, as I mentioned earlier, is we have put a cap now on materiality. So for bigger clients, and you're one of those bigger clients, there's a cap of 1.5% in terms of our materiality of your expenditure. And when this plan was drafted, we were basing it on last year. We thought that would be 15 million. Looking at the outturn now, we'll be reducing that to 14 million. I think broadly in terms of looking at the outturn figure. That doesn't affect really our approach as so. It just really affects the when we put it into our search into our system, the number of things that we'll need to test. So you won't see any direct impact per se. It will be more on our end. And then I think in terms of the accounts, and I'll comment to you in terms of that, we also have to give a value for money opinion. I suppose what we have looked at again is what do we see the most significant risk for the council, and I think that's already come through your governance statement and what we're hearing today. We determined that to be the financial sustainability and the medium-term financial strategy, and as a result of COVID-19, we don't believe we need to do a new risk because of that, because I think we're already looking at that, and we know you've been, this was the last year of your 3-year plan. You're now moving to the rolling position, and that you are going through your reanalysis, I suppose, of your own medium-term financial strategy and trying to build in COVID-19 and understand what the government support's going to be going forward. However, we don't feel we need to change our BFM approach as a result of COVID-19 because we felt that we were already dealing with the significant risk. As I say, Jim will come on a little bit logistics going forward, but primarily the whole timetable for local government was relaxed from having to produce accounts by the end of July. You had to the end of August, and then we had to the end of November to audit them. Broadly now, we are undertaking the audit right now, and we're looking to finish in September, but Jim will come on to a bit more when we come on to the progress report. If I take just onto page 94, one thing that has changed, we mentioned IFRS 16 there. As a result of COVID-19, that has been delayed. Therefore, whilst we were assuming that there will be some disclosures in the accounts, there are no quite detailed disclosures around what might happen when you transition to that. We do expect a little bit around the standard being in place but not adopted, but again, it will be fairly minimal when we're having conversations with the finance team around what the appropriate disclosures around that might be in the new world. I won't take you through, well, I'm happy to take questions. I won't take you through more significant risks in terms of that and other matters. Just in terms of materiality, we have set a lower specific materiality on page 99 of your pack, which is in relation to officer remuneration, and that's consistent with last year or previous years of £25,000. As I say, and on page 100 of your pack, we do go through a bit more detail our our rationale for VFM risk being financial sustainability. And I say I'm satisfied that even as a result of COVID-19, that stands in terms of the risk that is outstanding for us. As I say, you mentioned audit fees before. Again, we've had a conversation and discussions with Rob and the team around needing to increase the audit fees. As I said, they're primarily driven around quality. And I think the conversation we're having with the council, not so necessarily need that the work that needs to be done, but more about the process that has to be go through with PSAA. So they have been discussed. The one thing we are looking at, given the size of the council and the size of your asset portfolio, is we will be looking to get our own expert in to say that, give us assurance and comfort around the approach to asset valuations in the year.
If I could just ask a question on that, you're saying that the increase in fee is so that you can improve the quality of the audit. Is that something that we've asked for, or is that something which you've decided you want to do, for which you're going to charge us?
It's a combination of being driven. I mean, I think in terms of, as auditors, we are also subject to regulation. And our regulator is the Financial Reporting Council currently, until until government brings in legislation to change it into a new organisation. So, and it's not just Grant Thornton. I think it's been the regulator has been challenging all audit firms around their audit quality and the work they've been doing. And also, we had a conversation since the tender for the new contract went out. The FRC effectively has moved its position on what it sees to be acceptable quality for an audit. It has scores that range from 1, which is the top, down to 3, which effectively, I suppose, it is a fail, and then there's 2A and 2B. When we tendered for the audit, 2B was deemed to be unacceptable. In other words, it's a safe opinion with some improvements required. 2A is a safe opinion with minor improvement required. The FRC is now at the time has now said that all audits effectively have to be a 2A. So we need to we always strive to give a quality audit, and actually, as a firm, our results in public sector have been quite strong in that area. But now that we have the FRC you have to have all of your audits as a 2A, and to do that, their focus, I think, as we've had on the past, is around those harder to value things like land and buildings and the pension liability, and their expectation on what is acceptable with evidence or assurance has moved, and therefore we have to respond to that, and therefore we do need to undertake more work, and if need be, identify an expert. So I think it's more of a response to the way that the sector is moving, not necessarily reflection. It's not a reflection necessarily upon the council in that sense.
Robbie, are you persuaded by these arguments?
I am content that this is driven by the regulator, and I have a view that the audit fees have arguably been cut too far historically. There are specific elements like a separate valuer that I don't like. We've had a professional valuer and we're paying to have a second one repeat some of the work. For me, that doesn't really wash, but that is driven by the FRC, and Grant Thornton have to respond to that, and on that basis I'm comfortable with the change in the fee.
Are the other members of the committee happy as well? I will accept either a nod or silence that you're happy. Fine. Okay. Grant, thank you for that. Anything else that you would like to bring us up to date on the plan?
I don't think so on the plan. I mean, I think we are, as I say, we'll do a quick progress report, which just try to draw everything together on the revised timeline. The plan and fee are in there. I don't know whether you want me to go through the informative risk assessment as well, or
well, yes.
I actually wasn't planning to go through it. I was going to say
I think that would be a good idea, although I'll go to Councillor Cargill first.
Thank you, Chair. Grant, again, this is perhaps something that you'll be seeing throughout different variances within different authorities, is our estimate, the valuation of our land and buildings in particular. And buildings, of course, we've seen quite a change, as the Chair mentioned just a few minutes ago, about not using our offices as much as we did before. And Rob was on one of my group meetings, weren't you, Rob, where we were talking about exactly this and saying one thing we wouldn't be investing in is offices. Are we in any danger there financially? Is it something we need to look at? And I'm sorry, speculating on this one.
I'm not sure I can give an easy answer to that one. I've not done the detail on that. I think what you're alluding to actually is interesting, because as a firm as well, we are looking about the way we operate. I think there will be some post-COVID. I think every organisation will look to see, well, how have we operated differently in this? What do we want to keep? Maybe, what keep doing? What do we want to stop doing? My suspicion is, similar to yours, that maybe we won't be seeing 5 days a week working out of the office going forward. So I think there will be reconfigurations of how we use office space. I may back in from our firm. I think we believe we need office space, but maybe using it in a different way, because we still think there's collaboration and etc. So I think, in terms of your specific question, I think there's two points there. Is one, I suppose, if you were investing in offices just as an investment, if you know what I mean, I think there's a different question. I mean, I think we have been seeing some movements now in the office market in London. So if you were doing it purely as an investment, then maybe there is, you would need to look at that. But I can't give you investment. Should the council use office space? Well, you've always been looking, I think, at how you use office space. Most councils have been looking about most efficient use of it, and I don't think I'd expect that to change. So I don't think there's a monetary, in that sense, there will be a cost. You need to go through that. I mean, clearly, if you use less office space, then you'll make savings maybe on business rates, lights, electricity, etc. But I think the council's always been looking to efficiently use its estate. So I don't think there's any difference in that. I think, as maybe it's been alluded to earlier, and without putting words into Rob and Andrew's mouth, is maybe things have moved forward quicker. It's moved the game forward quicker. So I don't think there's necessarily a change in that. So I've not done a detailed analysis. I don't think you're at risk per se, but I think I would expect you as a good council to be looking across your assets and making sure you're using them as efficiently as possible.
Okay. I think it would be useful to talk about informing the audit risk assessment paper, Grant. If I could particularly draw people's attention to something which I spotted on page 8, which is fraud, in which you suggest that the primary responsibility to prevent and detect fraud rides with both. I think if there's going to be a primary, it has to be one party. And I think that the Audit and Standards Committee has an important oversight role, but surely the primary responsibility for the prevention and detection of fraud rests with the management of the council.
I don't think
agree with that.
No, I would agree with that, and I think within your I think it's AGS audit or the internal audit report, it says you're looking to move to the 3 lines of defence, I suppose, and in essence, I suppose external audit is the final line of defence, if you know what I mean. And I think you're right. So the primary is having the right processes and arrangements in place, in the first place. So. And clearly management has a responsibility for putting that in, and then you have your Audit and Governance Committee as well, that's making sure that you're satisfied that those arrangements are appropriate. So yes, I mean, I think the primary responsibility for prevention and detection of fraud would rest with the council itself, with the appropriate. My view would be that clearly officers can respond better than I can on that overall. I think what we have to say here, I suppose, in the way things might change in the audit world, our responsibility is to design our tests to detect material fraud. So as we alluded to earlier, I mean, and we're looking to make sure that we don't miss a fraud, I suppose, in the way of around about 14 million. So I'm comfortable that, our approach to that, we do a substantive audit, would pick that up. But I think that's where I would come in. And I think actually you would probably look at fraud at a much lower level. And I'm sure, Paul in internal audit can say what you've been doing around COVID-19, because I think we are seeing that, unfortunately, it seems to be one of those things, not unexpected, I suppose, that there are some people looking to exploit, individuals and companies and councils as a result of COVID-19. And we are seeing internal audits take a greater role in maybe looking to try and help mitigate any risks that might come out of that as well.
And then on that same page, you say we need to understand how the Audit and Standards Committee oversees the above processes. Is that because you need to and you now do, or you need to and you still don't?
Right. Okay. I think that's on that way. It's just a generic. I think what we're saying is, as part of our questioning, and I think actually in this paper itself, it's two-way communication. So I think it's it's somewhat like a rhetorical question. We're sort of saying we need to understand it. This is the response. So yes, we do understand it. Sorry, is what it is. So that's that's what standard says. So it's a sort of yes, we are. Yeah. So.
Then if I could go on to fraud risk assessment.
Yeah.
One of the things which we management have said is we are developing a fraud risk strategy as part of a wider review of the council's approach. Would someone like to say when that work will be done and when we as an Audit and Standards Committee are likely to see it? Is this, Rob, for you, or is this Paul? Or Rob, do you want to comment on that?
Chair, it would be for Paul or Chris to give the detail of the timetable on that.
Paul, do you want to comment on it? Not Wild. Chris, do you want to comment? Who has actually said this? We are developing a fraud risk strategy as part of a wider review of the council's approach to risk.
Yes, so looking at a fraud risk strategy is something that we picked up as a piece of work, and that's underway at the moment. I don't have a date to give you here now on when that will be completed. I can feed back on that after the meeting.
Yeah, I think the thing we'd be interested to know is, do you believe that home working or people working under stress or any of the things which have changed the nature of work in this COVID environment are influencing our thoughts about the likelihood of certain things being more or less subject to fraud? That's the issue, isn't it? Well, I just leave that with you as a thought then. So obviously, as soon as this fraud risk strategy has been worked up in draft or whatever, we'd be very interested to see it.
Sorry, Chair. I don't know if you want to take. I mean, I wasn't going to take through detail. I mean, I think as we've done, I know some new members, but prior years, as I say, this is two-way communication, and we're asked those questions to understand it. As you quite rightly pointed out, we've seen management responses. We're comfortable they reflect our understanding. And so thank you for drawing out some of those points there. Really, we're saying to the Audit and Standards Committee, do you recognise the council within this? Because basically, I suppose in a way we've sorted out our approach based upon the responses in here. So I think is there anything in here that you feel is not consistent with your knowledge and understanding of the council?
Well, I'm sure we'd all like to know, when is Fraud Awareness Week going to be, and when is the Do the Right Thing Week going to be? Who'd like to comment on that?
I can comment on that, Chair.
Thank you, Paul.
So, we had Fraud Awareness Week was held in November 2019, so we'd be expecting to repeat it in the autumn again, to probably around the same time this year.
Right. And then how about Do the Right Thing Week?
Chair,
yes?
Do the Right Thing Week generally is also in the autumn,
okay.
In November.
Fine. Thank you. Well, if we could perhaps put that in the minutes so that we are all reminded to look out for it when it comes. At a picky little point, Warwickshire County Council's a collective noun and so takes the singular. But I won't. Does anyone have anything that they would like to raise? Oh yes, there is something I wanted to raise. Yes. Impact of laws and regulations. The one thing which interested me in terms of management response is that I think we should pay tribute to our legal department and the oversight that they have to ensure that the council operates within laws and regulations, particularly, as I'm sure you all know, our legal department has recently been highly commended by, I think, being the country's leading legal affairs. Is that right, Rob?
Chair, yeah, they recently won the Lawyers in Local Government National Award for legal governance and legal team of the year, and an individual member of the legal department, Guy Darville, won the legal professional of the year on the same night. So they had some wonderful recognition.
So in terms of impact of laws and regulations, I think we should recognise that we have this distinguished legal department, and perhaps at the same time, rather than taking it under any other business, we could offer them congratulations that their contribution has been so recognised nationally. Then one of the other things, which is in a similar vein, impacts of laws and regulations. Every now and again, we do try to remind people the regulatory bodies to whom we are accountable. We all know about the Health and Safety Executive. We all know about Ofsted. We all know about the Care and Quality Commission. And one of the questions that has been posed: have there been any reports from other regulatory bodies, such as HM Revenue and Customs, which indicate non-compliance? Do we have a very clear policy that if any regulatory body indicates that Warwickshire County Council is not in compliance with those regulations with which it should be in compliance, that the Audit and Standards Committee is informed as a matter of course? I don't know whether that's one for Sarah Duxbury.
Chair, yes, I mean, we do have a reporting arrangement internally within the council and through the executive side as well when things aren't as planned. So certain reports from Ofsted inspections, for example, would follow the normal process of reporting through the committees of the council. I would expect that Paul would bring any matters of that nature into his regular reports, Paul Clark from the audit side, into his regular reports that come forward, so that this particular committee is aware of them too.
Paul, are you happy with that? Yeah, Paul?
Yes, Chairman, that's part of what we do. So it's certainly part of our planning work picks up on any issues that have been raised by other regulators.
By any other regulators.
Feed that into.
So as soon as it happened, it would be on your radar, and you would let us know as part of one of your routine reports, would you?
Yeah, depending on the severity of it, yeah.
Okay. Going concern considerations, Grant, if I could go on your paper. Are there new going concern considerations which are being applied to local government in view of COVID, obligations being taken on, funding becoming uncertain, and with particular relevance, of course, to what happened in neighbouring Northamptonshire?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There aren't any specific new accounting standards or auditing standards around going concern. I don't think you'd be surprised to know that we will be having probably a greater focus on it this year. I mean, I think you need to take a step back that in terms of preparing your accounts on a going concern basis as a public sector body, you will always prepare your accounts on a going concern basis because your services will transfer. Where we are having greater conversations this year, and actually it's more there is a conversation going on within the sector as a whole, is whether there might be any material uncertainties, which I think is probably what you're alluding to there, about whether there's any disclosures required in the accounts around material uncertainties that might impact upon your ability to continue. I don't think at Warwickshire, to be honest, and as you've alluded to, when we look at your level of reserves, etc., I don't think there's any short-term concerns that I have as your auditor, but clearly the sector as a whole is impacted, and I think that's why what we will be looking through with hopefully Rob and the finance team about that, how you're getting through in terms of reprofiling your medium-term financial strategy. There's still a lot of uncertainty out there at the moment around what support you might get through government, and I think the government is still, doing its best to translate that effectively. I mean, we know that business rates reset's been deferred. I think, and so is the sort of the fairer funding regime has been deferred. So I think it's how that all factors into how easy it is for you to plan going forward. So I think there'll be a greater focus from us as Audit. Nothing specifically has changed in terms of the going concern, but we will be looking at that, probably just picking up on where you are in terms of your process of updating your position going forward.
Well, it is of concern, and I'm sure it's of concern to us all, because we've had one nightmare in Northamptonshire, and they, of course, were a going concern until the night before they went bust. And I would suspect that they are not the only local authority in the course of the next 2 years that will go bust when the night before everyone thought they were a going concern. So the important thing is that auditors have a more rigorous test as to what really is a going concern, and they can flag it up sooner rather than later.
I think we've had conversations before, Chair. We always do flag it up sooner rather than later. Yes, I mean, there was conversations in the press around what you might hear about 114 notices, etc. I think it is important, whilst, that I suppose it's service continuity as well in terms of that. And certainly we would flag if we had any issues around that. But at the moment, there's nothing that I need to bring direct your attention. As we were saying, a part of our value for money conclusion this year, that's why it's still in there as a risk. We're not saying that there'll be an adverse fine or anything like that, but it's why it's continuing in there, because we recognise we do need to keep that monitored, and it's not just yourselves, that's probably across the sector as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Does anyone else have anything on that? Now, in terms of item 5, Grant, which is the progress report, do you want to just cover that off?
I think Jim was going to take you through that, but I don't think there's anything. I think probably the one thing in there probably is just the timeline, and I don't think there's any particular issues from interim. But Jim, do you want to just pick that up very briefly?
No, that's right, Grant. I was just going to talk to it very briefly to just say there was nothing coming out of visits that I'd like to bring to the attention of members. And as I mentioned earlier, the team are currently working on both the council and the pension fund audit, and we'll be doing so throughout July and August, with the aim of closing down by early September.
That's fine, Jim. Thanks. Okay, so let's. Is everyone happy for us to move on to item 6, which is the internal audit plan? Yes. No. Thank you. Okay, item 6, internal audit plan, pages 139 to 166. Paul. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So, just as context, the audit plan originally was put together for the committee in March. Obviously, that meeting was cancelled, and as part of the planning process, we'd gone through an extensive research and consultation exercise to put the original plan together. We now had some time to reflect on the impact of COVID on the first quarter and what it's likely to be as an impact going forward, and we've brought that into this report, which reflects where there's needed to be a change in focus, and where some of the audit work that would have gone ahead will probably slip into a future year because of the timescales of developments that were expected. Overall, the resources for the plan are still in line with previous plans, although there has been some impact in the first quarter. And we've brought in a new section. Just draw attention to page 156.
Okay, we've got 156 responding to COVID-19.
Yeah, so this is a new section of the plan that's been added in to identify areas where we're expecting to have to do work, and where we've already been doing work, providing advice on things like the setup of the food distribution hubs, provider finance support, changes to early years hubs and things like that. We've been doing that work during the first quarter, and also we were speaking a few minutes ago about fraud potential impact for COVID. We've also been working on that, and we've put out a awareness raising item on COVID fraud risks as well, to raise awareness for all staff around that. The other just thing in terms of the plan for this year is just to note the structure of it. It's been structured from page 157, the pages beyond that are structured around the new council plan, which has been produced. So rather than it being directorate by directorate, it's designed to reflect the priorities of the council around the council priority outcomes, and the council plan also pointing towards responding to climate change. There's particularly identified. So what we've tried to do is to align the internal audit work and the need to provide an assurance across the year with the aims of the council as set out in the council plan. Thank you.
One of the areas which are under a lot of examination at the moment, Paul, are adult social care. And this is particularly, of course, about COVID-19 and adult social care. To what extent do you feel that we should be looking more rigorously at whether our statutory obligations for adult social care are being properly discharged?
It's certainly there as a risk. It's a continuing risk that we look at in the planning, and certainly is an area we've looked at in the past. We've got, in terms of time available in contingency for particular risk areas that are highlighted during the year, and that's within that COVID block, as well as some specific pieces of work. So on page 157, there's changes in regulations around liberty protection. The safeguarding project has been built into the plan for this year, so we've tried to identify those things through the consultation process and build them into the plan.
Yes, I'm not quite sure you've taken the point. The point that I have is that we have statutory obligations to provide a proper standard of adult social care, and we all know in adult care homes around the country, we're all beginning to wonder whether in fact local authorities have been doing all that they should. Is it our intention to look to see whether Warwickshire has been doing all that it should? Are there any councillors, by the way, who would like to speak to that? Andrew, you've got your hand up first, I see. Can't hear you, your microphone's off.
Apologies, I keep doing that. COVID-19 had an interesting impact on the adult side of the world. I mean, and there's been quite a few changes by central government to try and relax various things within the system to make it able to cope with the increased numbers through COVID. So I think that there's definitely something which I think is reflected in the plan that Paul's pulled together around how we bring back in various systems that sort of were relaxed whilst COVID was going on. Some of that's around how we charge people. Some of that's around the extent to which services are provided to people. I think there's a general need then to look at, as you say, the quality side of things. But I think that's taken care of in the audits that are done generally each year on adult social care, because there's a responsibility to make sure that's there regardless of whether COVID-19 is happening or not. So I'd anticipate that the work that Paul's team does is looking at that as a matter of course anyway. But I think there's some additional areas of risk that we need to just make sure are covered off, particularly around payments to providers as well have been relaxed to an extent. Running on estimates rather than actuals as a consequence of COVID and things like that. So it's those things that I think probably pose more risk to us initially, than the general quality that underpins what we're doing from a Warwickshire point of view. And having just come from Staffordshire, my observation of Warwickshire is a very good adult social care system that's well managed, good relationships. We were praised nationally by Health around the arrangements we put in place with the CCGs to manage arrangements locally in Warwickshire, and we're held up as a beacon against other authorities. So I think there's some quite good work that goes on between commissioners, health and providers, and we've seen far less noise from our providers around the support they've had than a lot of other authorities across the country have had. There's been some quite acrimonious situations in some areas. And we've experienced none of that, no complaints from the market. We've tried to respond sensibly in most instances.
And is that the view of other members of the committee too, that we feel that in Warwickshire we're rather better served for adult social care than other parts of the world that may have been brought to your attention?
It's John here. Yes, I think you're right. We're very lucky that we actually have a very wealthy electorate, and we don't have that heavier load on council services for adult social care. I mean, we always have to remember Warwickshire is a remarkably lucky county when it comes to any form of public sector expenditure. So yes, I think we're okay. Whether we are as good as we should be, of course, you never know. But certainly compared to we ought to compare ourselves probably to people like Oxfordshire, and we have a peer group, don't we?
Yeah.
Which we look at. So that may be what, if you were more interested, we could do that. But
and so, are we aware how many people in adult social care have died of COVID-19?
I think we are, because I think we record that, particularly in the stats that the councillors get. What they are off the top of my head, I've no idea.
But everyone is informed, and we know whether we're doing better or worse than neighbouring local authorities, do we?
I think we know deaths. I'm not sure we know the specific ones that are in adult social care. I think that's been worked on as part of the first quarter monitoring. I don't have the figures to hand, but we could share those with the committee if that's of interest once we have them.
Councillor Gifford?
Yes, I hear what Councillor Horner was saying, and yes, certainly the south of the county is very prosperous and has many advantages, but in fairness, the north of the county does feel as though it's in a different place. But perhaps Councillor Dervix would be better able to give his views on the north.
Councillor Dervix?
Thank you. This is an argument that comes up all the time, that there is a big disparity between the north and the south. If you're sitting in the south of the county, the north is getting all the resources. If you're sitting in the north of the county, the south of the county is getting all of the resources. I think it is patchy, and certainly that at the moment the figures indicate that the situation is more serious in Nuneaton and Bedworth and in the north of the county. We haven't found out what the underlying reasons for that are yet. We are kept up to date with the overall figures, but I think that much more work needs to be done to understand exactly what is happening and to make sure that there is sufficient provision right across the county. I'm not convinced that it's as rosy in all areas as we would like it to be.
Councillor Cargill, do you have a view?
I'm trying not to be political about it.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. I think it's a valid, thank you, it's a valid discussion, because at the end of the day, I don't have the statistics necessarily for authorities, so I can't comment. I would have suggested, though, that the response that we've provided within the county has been excellent, and all officers should be commended for that. So yeah, I've got absolutely no issues of what we've done, but how we compare to others, I can't comment. I think it's been hard.
Agree with that. Sorry, Mark. I would agree with that. When we tried to find out what was happening on the Leicestershire border with Warwickshire, with North Warwickshire, because their hospital is actually in Nuneaton. We had great difficulty finding out what was going on, within yards, really, of our area. And I think the problem that that caused, and the sort of the information, that the perception of people in the area was badly coloured by that, and it wasn't a fault of the county or Warwickshire Public Health. I think it was from external influences in not releasing pertinent information in a timely way. And I think that has been reflected in the response across the county. I don't think it is just this county. I think it is everywhere. And I think certainly until recently, it was still going on that detailed information was not being released so that it could be acted on by officers and by everybody else. But I think we are probably in the same situation as other authorities across the country in that, and there's been quite a lot of stuff in the press about that. So sorry for interrupting you, Mark.
You're right, but if that is the case, we don't have to accept it, of course. We can try and do something about it. Councillor Birdie, I'd very much like to hear from you as to how you feel adult social care has been going in Warwickshire.
I think all service providers have seen difficulties in some areas, but I think the staff have performed quite well. Where I see some of the difficulties are where the clinical care finishes and social care starts. Those are the problem areas. And I think overall, in this difficult time, I think it's been handled pretty well. That you got on and done things. Whether we find any issues later on as we catch up is the problem, but I see more of NHS and social care divide is the issue, where one finishes, the starts. But I couldn't really, all the people that I've talked to that had a need for it, they've been reasonably happy. So I think we performed reasonably well.
Okay.
In that respect.
Okay, thanks. Rob, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I really wanted to sort of remind the committee we're talking about the internal audit plan, and there is some danger in getting into sort of speculation about social care in the middle of a response to a global pandemic. I think it should be sufficient to note in the plan that we obviously do need to look at the resilience and any sort of residual risk on adult social care, but obviously there is an overview and scrutiny committee that will be looking in depth at this with proper information, and I'm just a little uncomfortable with overly speculative conversations about something without a paper to inform you.
Good point. Thanks. Paul, anything else on the internal audit plan?
No, nothing else. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions on the plan or further questions? Okay, so let's move on to the internal audit annual report, which begins at page 167 of your pack. Summarising results of internal audit work carried out in the year ended the 31st of March. And something that I spoke to Paul about earlier was we'd all be quite interested at some point to know, well, just how many outstanding recommendations are there from last year's work, and have the outstanding recommendations been adversely, or the implementation of them be adversely impacted by COVID-19? But Paul, would you like to say any more about your report?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So certainly, looking back at 2019-20 and producing this report, it's been a very difficult end to the year as COVID impacted just as we were coming towards the end of our work, and it had a direct impact on us being able to complete some of that work, and a number of the audits that are noted in the annual report is still at draft report stage, because the council was focusing on the COVID response, and we're aiming to get those drafts to a final stage as soon as we can. But there has been a significant impact, which is made this year quite different to previous years, and that also impacted on being able to answer that question about the follow-up and implementation of recommendations. We would normally carry out a follow-up exercise in April each year to see the extent to which actions have been implemented and be able to report that as part of the annual report. But that exercise was put on hold, and we're planning to undertake that over the summer. So the next report we bring to committee would have that information, but we've got limited information at this stage on progress of implementation of recommendations in the last quarter of the year. So there's certainly been that impact. But just overview of the annual report itself. If we look at the coverage across the year, I still feel that there's sufficient coverage and work being undertaken to be able to produce the annual report, taking into account the audits that are at draft stage and what we know about the control issues that have been identified across the year. Overall, there are a proportion of substantial opinions for 2019-20 was lower than the previous year. However, moderate assurance in terms of our reviews is still regarded as a positive opinion, and 71% of audits were moderate or better. And along with the other information we've had available from other providers of assurance, I feel that the moderate assurance opinion for the year is appropriate and reflects the work that we've undertaken. I'd be happy to take any questions.
But is there a trend? Well, no, I won't ask the question because I think both Rob Powell and Councillor Horner wanted to say something. Rob, I think you were first.
Apologies, Chair, that was an old hand that I failed to lower.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Councillor Horner. Is Councillor Horner also an old hand?
3 mice on my desk at the moment, and I wasn't quite sure which one worked. Yeah, I was just you sort of commented a little bit about the level of assurances, but I was looking at the number of limited assurances. Where it says limited assurance draft, is that it might not be limited assurance, or is it that you haven't finished the report? So that's the first question. Second question is that there do seem to be quite a few of them. And is that unusual? And what do we know that people are doing to sort them out? Do you expect them all to be sorted out pretty quickly? And I guess we have to wait for the reports to be finished and no longer draft to find out?
Just while Paul's thinking of a good answer to that good question, Councillor Gifford, do you want to add something to that?
No, in fact, it was very much on the. It was my concerns were about what seemed to me to be quite a substantial number of limited assurance, both draft and the couple that are, payroll and consultants and so on that are actually where they're finished and still got limited assurance. It's I think a matter. I don't remember having quite so many limited assurance in the report in the past, and it seemed to me to be a substantial increase in the number of limited assurance. Is it because we're getting tougher in the way we do it?
Okay, Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So there's a comparison on page 172 which shows the sort of a pie chart comparing this year with the previous year, and that shows the limited opinions in 18-19 were 17% and 29% for 19-20. So there are more limited opinions. I don't believe that the approach has changed in terms of the scoring. They are. I don't think we're taking a different approach, but it reflects the work that's been undertaken. There's always going to be some variation between years depending on which particular areas get brought up, so I wouldn't expect it to be uniform. But where we do have limited assurance, it's certainly there to highlight issues to the managers and to the committee, and we'd expect there to be action taken promptly to address the issues that have been raised, and would expect that to be coming through. But those that are still at draft stage, the committee haven't yet seen what the reasons are for them being limited, and they will come through in future monitoring reports when a report goes from draft to final, and it's a limited assurance. We do bring a summary of the issues that came out and made it limited, which come through as one of the private papers as part of the monitoring report. So that would be coming to, hopefully, to the next committee. You would see the content of those.
Yes, I do feel that it's a good news and bad news story. I think the good news is that we are finding more and more areas where we can do better, and I think we have to feel very positive and good about that. The bad news is that we are finding more and more areas where we should be doing better, and so we can't be complacent. But I think the thing it really shows, Paul, is you are doing good work, because you're identifying things that can be done to make things better, and we all support you in that.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Just a quick comment, really, and two dimensions. One, Paul and I have had a conversation about trying to understand some of the root causes for the opinions, to understand whether there's any emerging trends that we need to address as an organisation, or whether it is just the cycle of audits that happen to be being focused on and independent of any organisation things. So we've been through a lot of change over the last few years, so I just want to understand whether that's impacting on any of the control environments and where we are at the moment, because there is a slight uptick, as you can see, over the yearly trend, not just the last 2 years but the last 3 years, in the sort of limited assurances. And I can't talk about all the limited areas because they're not all mine, but just as a way of example of some of them, pensions is one that's on there where 4 audits have been done, both on the administration and the investment side of it. And actually there's one done earlier last year that led to a quite significant action plan that was put in place, and you can see that's already turned around into a moderate assurance then as a consequence of the work that's been done, and there's further work continuing to try and improve that system moving forward. So management do take these very seriously in terms of then trying to, as you've seen from your previous committees, to try and turn these things around. I also think there's a range of different types of audits in here, that some are marginal limited assurances. So if I look at accounts payable, that's still in the draft stage, that was heading for a substantial assurance until we ended up making an overpayment, a significant overpayment, which we've had to claw back. But as a result of that, it instantly dropped it into a limited assurance audit, because it happened during the audit period. But we've put things in place to rectify that. The rest of the system was fine, bar one duplicate payment that was made. So I think it varies, and then I think there's other areas where there are more significant concerns that are for others to sort of comment on and understand how we take forward. So I think as you see those coming forward to future committees, I think that'll make it a little bit clearer from that point of view.
Thanks. Councillor Gifford. Councillor Gifford, can't hear you.
Sorry, I could see myself. I've forgotten to turn on. Yes, I mean, I couldn't help noticing that a substantial number of most of the limited assurance come within the resources. And I also wondered whether there was an issue of a change in staffing and so on, whether that was having an effect that would then be sorted in due course.
Paul, do you want to comment on that, or maybe Rob?
Well, I'll just say from my end that the audit plan for the year had quite an emphasis on the resources area. There was a desire to have a good look through all the main financial systems last year. So there's been more audits on the resources area. I don't know whether Rob would like to comment further on the question.
Yeah, I mean, certainly 23 out of 31 audits were in resources, so I'm not sure whether proportionately it's particularly material. I mean, what I can say is that I take internal audit very seriously, and I want the internal audits to look at the areas of greatest risk, even if that might increase the chances of getting a lower level of assurance. When we do get limited assurance, the team come in and have a chat with me about what they're going to do about it routinely, and we use this as a lever of improvement. I don't think, I mean, Andy mentioned a couple of the limited assurance ones came down to one single episode, the payroll one and the accounts payable, in systems that otherwise were okay. I think there are some other areas that reflect change that we've made around the HR system, for example, as well, where we've got some more work to do, and we know that, and we've got a project going on. But so I think it's, it is something that we need to keep an eye on, but I think there is a danger of looking too much at the percentage of assurance levels in a particular year, or thinking it's skewed in one particular area. The point is we need to improve the assurance framework in the round, and we'll do that both by developing a clearer assurance framework and trying to use internal audit to improve the organisation's overall control environment.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the internal audit annual report? So, Paul, it's a good report. I think very sensible to show those trend in opinions and to have the explanation that you have. So thank you, and we commend it to the council. People happy that we move on to the next item, annual report of the Audit and Standards Committee? Yep, thank you. That is item number 8. One of the things that I thought, and I'm not sure whether this is something for Jane or for someone else, I think that in recognising Bob Meacham's passing, that we should also reflect the fact that we decided some time ago that we would recruit a replacement independent member of this committee. One of the other things which didn't come up is that I recall that in the course of the past year, in practically every meeting, we made inquiries both internally and of the external auditors to be sure that we had learned every single lesson that we could from the Northamptonshire experience. And I think that we gave that sufficient attention. That's worthy of including in our annual report. Is there anyone who'd have a different view to that? No? Okay, thank you. Oh, Jane, sorry, I see your hands up.
No, I was just to say I was nominated to introduce this, Chair, but I'm happy to take, obviously, members' observations on the report.
Jane, I'm sorry I didn't ask you to introduce the report. Would you like to introduce it?
No, I'm sure members have read it. Thank
okay.
you, Chair.
Okay. One of the other things on internal audit, was it not, Paul, in this period that the separation was engineered between Warwickshire and Worcestershire, and did we not give that some attention? Paul? Can't hear you.
Sorry, I was just getting the microphone back on. The Worcestershire ended 31st of March 2019, so it probably just fell into the previous year.
It was outside the period. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to everyone else. Sorry, does anyone have any thoughts they would like to add to the annual report? In terms of going forward, and thank you, Kieran Amos, for being here with us. One of the things that we have undertaken to do is to keep under review those buildings in Warwickshire, whether they be publicly owned or whether they be privately owned, which are clad in flammable material. I don't know whether at this point in time Kieran would like to just add anything about his ongoing scrutiny of that matter.
Thank you, Chair. It's worthy of note that we've had investment from our County Council in the protection team, which has enabled us to put more rigour into the risk-based inspection programme. And that's part of also the requirements of the Dame Judith Hackett report and the Grenfell findings. So we're in a good position that we can confirm there are no aluminium composite material cladding buildings within Warwickshire.
And that's either privately or publicly owned, is it, Kieran?
It's private public, indeed, yeah. And we've been working with districts and boroughs to ensure that those clad buildings are safe, and we've made arrangements with those responsible persons for those buildings to ensure that they've got safety measures in place for any other clad buildings. And the programme will maintain a risk-based inspection of those types of properties. There's another linkage now that moves on to timber-clad structures as well. So the debate goes on, but certainly our teams are well informed, and also have been we've restructured the team to ensure that they can focus more on those activities thanks to the investment from the County Council.
Fine, thank you. Well, certainly it's something which came up at least two of our meetings in the course of this period of the annual report. And so I think somewhere I think we should say how we have stayed close to the situation and how encouraged we've been by the response of our fire service to this ghastly business. Okay. Oh, the other thing, of course, which I think should reflect is our continued scrutiny of the quality of our case management, both in children's services and in adult social care. So I think if something, Jane could go in on that.
Yes, thank you,
Okay,
Chair.
Great. Happy to move on, everybody? Happy to move on. Thank you. Item number 9 is a little humdinger. The Local Government Association consultation on a member code of conduct. The report begins on page 187. And of course, I was particularly interested to notice, because I hadn't seen before, that one of the 4 signatories to the introduction is Councillor Izzy Seckham. So this clearly has got some prominence in Warwickshire, and I'm sure we would want to be very careful in our considered response. I get a few thoughts about it, but I wonder if I could have a round table, because this is about you, and I don't think this has gone to other members of council, has it, Jane?
No, it hasn't, Chair.
Right. So this is about you. What do you think about it? What do you think about what is being suggested, for example, and about the question as to the concept of acting with civility? I wonder what you think about the current definitions of bullying and harassment. So I'd love to hear from you. And the first person I'm going to pick on, because he's always thought about these things so carefully, is Councillor Gifford. which gives you all time to think now about what you're going to say. Councillor Gifford.
Firstly, I would say that I've been on this committee for a number of years now, and we haven't actually had a case come before us. And I don't think that's been because we've been lax or that the monitoring officer has not done their job. It's because I think on the whole we are a very civilised council, and that's something that we should be pleased with. And I read this, and I didn't actually have any real problems with what's suggested. So I didn't have any problems with what was suggested. I think the important thing is, yes, there may be times occasionally when somebody doesn't quite meet the requirements in terms of civility or whatever. What is also interesting is the how that might be dealt with, and the internal resolution procedure, which I thought was a useful bit, that was in that it's got its different stages, and I thought those were useful because it meant that if there is a problem, it can be dealt with it can be discussed, and the apology and the written apology can be made at a relatively early stage rather than going into a substantial investigation right at the beginning. But I do think that essentially we are a very civilised council, and that I'm proud, and I think we should all be proud.
Okay. Councillor Horner, what are your thoughts about the consultation? And we're going to have to talk about all the questions, but Jane, help us. By when do these questions have to be answered, and what's the end of the consultation? And if we answer the questions as a committee, to whom do we direct our answers?
Direct your answers to me. The consultation ends on the 17th of August.
Right.
Hi. Yeah, I didn't see there's anything particularly wrong with it at all, actually. I thought it was sad that we had to put in a thing about treating people with whatever it was.
Civility.
Civility, that's right. But it's basically sort of a thing we've been signing up for since I've been a councillor, actually. I didn't see there was much difference. So I don't have any problems or any comments, really.
All right. Councillor Derbyx.
Thank you. I think this really sort of gives a formal model document for all councils. I think councils that are working well already have their own documents that are broadly in line with this. And the majority of councillors adhere to it. I have been in the situation where proceedings have had to go through the code of conduct elsewhere because of the actions of a council. And generally speaking, in my experience, the sort of bad behaviour that this is trying to guard against is actually abhorrent to the 99% of all of the councillors. I think that it is sad that we have to have model codes of conduct, but unfortunately they are necessary, and it actually does help to provide protection for councillors, as well as a stick to beat them with, as it were, if they step out of line. So I welcome this.
I think the encouraging thing about this consultation, and we don't have a lot of time to reply though, is that the people who put together the code clearly have some perhaps only moderate discomfort about whether they've been unnecessarily ambiguous in some of their terminology. And so that is why something like question 7 emerges. Because this has to apply, this will apply over the whole country. to what extent do you think the concept of acting with civility is sufficiently clear in the document? To a great extent, a moderate extent, not at all, prefer not to say. Since this isn't going to other councillors, it is for us, I suspect, Jane will correct me if I'm wrong, it is for us to reply on behalf of Warwickshire.
Well, that was one of my concerns, to make sure that definitions are very clear, because when you talk about civility, for instance, different people have different ideas about that, so it is very important that those definitions are as clear as possible.
So
and I felt that
what would your answer be?
Largely, they are. To a moderate extent, they are clear.
To a moderate extent.
Yeah.
Councillor Cargill, whether you'd like to comment about the thing in the round, and also about some of those specific questions which we're being asked to respond to.
Yes, by all means. First of all, obviously, I do welcome it in principle, because at the end of the day, it sort of pulls everybody together. I do ask or question where it came from, and I do wonder sometimes whether it was the bad behaviour we saw at the national elections, where a lot of bullying was taking place as well. But we do see a little bit of that in local government, but not a huge amount, has been mentioned. So it isn't a major issue, and I think that quite often the chief execs tend to jump on it quite quickly, and the leaders, etc. So I don't have a major problem there. With regards to the questions, obviously I need to go through all of them, but some of it's common sense, and we do treat most, certainly in Warwickshire and Stratford, where I'm a district councillor, we treat people with civility and such like. We just don't. It doesn't happen in our particular area. I hope my colleagues will back me up on that, because we are a very equitable, if that's the right word, organisation. So, in principle, quite happy to go along with it.
Okay. Councillor Birdie, do you have any thoughts on this?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as one of the perhaps the newest members on this board, I think I haven't really experienced any difficulties, and I think formalising in this way is perhaps not a bad thing. I do think, though, that with the recent lockdown, there is a bit more frustration and anger out there in the community, and that might transfer to some of the members. And so we just need to ensure that something's in place to both protect the staff and the members, really. I haven't looked at the questions in detail, will do now after the meeting, but I think it's one of those things that's already in place, but formalising it isn't a bad thing if you get issues arising going forward.
Fine. Thank you. Who haven't? Councillor Horner.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I put my hand up again because it just struck me that as a statement of sort of intent, and I was thinking this, I was reading this as being pretty reasonable, but the problem is going to be when you think what position we're going to be in when somebody is complained at for being lacking civility. How on earth you deal with that? It is this whole definition of what civility is, because to be civility in one person is deep insult to another person, depending on where they're coming from. I was thinking of the Home Secretary and her senior civil servant. The fight there, which appeared to be, I think, more underlying about more other issues, but it's a real problem. It's going to be an absolute minefield to try and work through that.
So what would your answer be to question 7 then, Councillor Horner?
Civility, I don't think you can. I don't think there is an answer to it, I'm afraid. I was trying to think that it depends on your education. It depends what you've been brought up to. It depends on, Russians are very rude to each other, but they're quite happy. If a Russian talks to anybody in the council, they'd be horrified.
Well, one could quite reasonably argue that the standard of civility that you'd offer a judge in the Crown Court is very different to that which you might offer your grandchildren. Now, those are two ends of the spectrum, but civility is different things for different people at different times. I think that what I'd like to do is this, because this is a code which is going to apply to you as councillors, and I think you have to consider your own positions. Could I ask you to look at these questions, answer them in a reasonable amount of time, and let Jane have them? I'm sure she will anonymise them, and then she will put that view forward as the results of the consultation from the members of this committee. I think I will only comment on a few of the points. I am a little worried about your being expected to act as if you were a councillor, and you are a councillor, whatever you might do in any email or social media conversation, for example. I think there might be some ambiguities there which would concern me. But is it all right if I ask you all to answer these questions individually, and on the condition that they're anonymised, pass them on to Jane? Is that okay? Good. Thank you.
Could you send us a Word version so we can easily edit it?
Yes, indeed. I'll do that.
Thanks. Yes, we're a pilot.
Councillor Riley, I'm sorry. The Councillor Riley's next.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of issues. One assumes if we're all applying independently, then the group won't have a position on this, and it feels sufficiently serious for the group to have a position on its own response. So whether Jane couldn't ask for an extension to the next meeting shows that we could at least consider our response. I think on the whole, I agree. It's a fine document, and it particularly support Bill in his conversations about the informal resolution elements of the draft. The only thing that I would say is that, as you have identified, the restrictions on people's lives as councillors are becoming more and more significant with every passing year. And we are going to end up, if we're not careful, with a group of people who do not represent society being councillors. Whether it's as far as John's observation about Russians, but I don't know. But what I do know is that good councillors come in all shapes and forms and not necessarily all fit into a certain mould. So I think there's a significant number of subjective judgments in there which make me nervous. There are two other comments that I think are interesting. One is about this constant reference of referral to matters to the police. So the policy needs to be clearer about what elements do need referring to the police, because actually we're talking about a police service that is under significant pressure nationally with resourcing anyway, and to start humping on complaints about councillors that often play out in public, it seems to need clarification in terms of the seriousness of what it goes to the police. And then finally it picks up on an area that Neil's spoken about, and we are both aware of district level issues that go on where there are a number of complaints being made, and it seems to be that the complaint system has fallen into a tactic whereby you can make a complaint, there is no comeback to the complainant, but the complainant can complain about anything, and that complaint subjects the person that is complained about to not only an investigation but also quite a stressful period of their lives. So in the any other comments, I think that there is a question about raising with the LGA about the false complaints. I've forgotten the phrase that is used now about somebody that repeatedly makes false complaints.
Vexatious.
Record the complaints from that person. Sorry, Jane, I missed that.
Yeah. Jane, did you want to come back at this point?
Yes, I was just going to say this is an online questionnaire, and I'm obviously happy to group together the views of the members of the committee in an anonymous way and submit it. But it is open to individual councillors or their groups to make a a separate response. Officers as well can also respond. Anybody can in an individual sense.
So, Jane, do you think we should commend answering this consultation questionnaire to all councillors?
Yes, Chair, that would be useful.
Would everyone agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Fine.
All I'd say is that this is the Audit and Standards Committee, and if we don't have a position, then that doesn't sound very, very standards-ish to me.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a fair point. Although whether the position that we take should override all the other councillors in Warwickshire, I think is a moot point. I mean, certainly I have some views about things which shouldn't be in the code. But I think what is most important is the view of councillors, because you have to live it. And so I would defer to the view of councillors in my own case. So Jane, are you saying that if we commended this to all councillors, that they would have the opportunity of contributing online themselves directly, and it wouldn't go through you?
Yes, Chair, that's what I would suggest. But I'm happy to put together a collective response from this committee.
All right. Well, let's do it in two ways. On the one hand, if you could consider the responses from the members of this committee and coordinate them, consolidate them rather, so that we have a committee view. And in parallel with that, say that we would commend the online questionnaire to all councillors as well.
Yes.
Do
yes,
that.
Chair.
Right. So coming back to Councillor Riley's point then, presumably there are going to be some points on which we would all agree, and there are some points in which we might differ. But we won't know that until you've all been through the questionnaire and you've all considered your positions. Do we have time to have maybe a 1 hour Zoom meeting in between now and the end of the consultation, Jane, that we could come in and home on any troublesome subjects so that we could perhaps assume a leadership position which Councillor Riley would support?
I'm sure we could arrange that, Chair.
How does that sound, Councillor Riley?
Spot on, thanks, Chair. The one issue that I would be grateful for officer advice on is this issue of vexatious complainants. Vexatious being the term that I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
So going back in ancient history, Chair, when I was a serving police officer, there were regulations about how you dealt with vexatious complainants, and as councillors, we will all know there are certain people within our communities who will become vexatious, who are vexatious, and this policy just needs. Now we're walking into this world of conduct being more and more tightly defined and controlled. We need to be clear how we protect members as well as open members up to scrutiny.
Yes, can I just say, Chair, that obviously within our general complaints procedures, we do have formal arrangements for dealing with vexatious complainants, but also in terms of our current arrangements, we have the filtering exercise that is carried out by the monitoring officer, at which point we can decide not to proceed with a complaint if it is considered to be vexatious or tit for tat, or something that really isn't in the public interest to investigate.
Okay. I wonder whether someone would like to say something about whether their use of social media should be incorporated into the Code of Conduct. Councillor Horner, you're a useful user of social media.
Hardly. The trouble with social media, I keep away from social media for the very reason that it's extremely dangerous.
Yes. I think that's very good advice.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be a person to talk to about that.
Councillor Cargill's got his hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things. Sorry, John, did you finish?
Yes, I had. It's just muting myself.
First of all, there's a few things there. I'll pick the first vexatious claims. I have been through one, and it was very well handled by the officers. So, in other words, it was sort of just dismissed, and because it wasn't relevant. So, I have confidence in that part of the process. With regards to bullying and such like, just thinking about what was said both by John and Dave was. When you've been a councillor for a few years, we have what we term, or I term, robust discussions. And in between that, we can have a robust discussion, which I'm sure would appall some people, but we can go and have a cup of coffee afterwards, because it is just the way we actually operate, so to speak. That's the way we are. And you have to have those discussions because you get the meaning and the truth out of what you want to say in a way that may be called blunt, but at the end of the day, it's not bullying, it's just putting your point forward. So that's going to be a tricky one if say a new member joins and we use the same sort of technique. Is it bullying? Someone's got to define that, and I don't know how to do that. With regards to social media, though, he does a good point, but common sense applies. And we may, as a nation, be short of common sense sometimes, a little bit of a deficit there. But really and truthfully, common sense applies, and some of the things in there, being civil, etc., apply anyway, whether you're talking to somebody or using social media. That's in my view.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rob Powell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to say this is only a consultation on a draft that the council isn't obliged to adopt. Is my understanding of the status of this. So, certainly the paper was sort of suggesting that you authorised me to put in a response on behalf of the council reflecting your views. If you want to have a further meeting and respond individually and go through it in that depth, then obviously we will happily facilitate it. But I don't think this is committing Warwickshire to adopting the code of conduct. What I would say on social media is I think the code of conduct would look like it was missing a big area of difficulty for members across the country if it omitted social media. There are many examples are written, I haven't seen any here, but where use of social media has caused difficulties for councillors, and so I think it is right that it is covered. You are right as well to point out what a difficult area it is, but I certainly, my advice to the committee.
That was an unfortunate point to go silent, because you said my advice to the committee is, and then you went silent.
I think his legs froze and died. He's coming back.
Sorry, Chair. You may have missed the end of my contribution. I certainly missed your next bit. My apologies.
No, it was just you said, and my advice to the committee is, and then you went dead.
I'm trying to remember what I said. I think it was the code of conduct should cover social media, but I think I was acknowledging the inherent difficulties of it. But I think in the modern age, it is important that that's covered, because there have been examples where councillors have tripped up somewhat with the use of social media.
Yeah, I agree. I do feel that it would be an appropriate courtesy to the leader of Warwickshire County Council, who is a signatory of the introduction of this, that we do it justice. So we're all going to reply to Jane individually where we feel that we want to. She's going to consolidate our view. If there are any particular points on which we might need another half an hour or so's chat, then we'll put ourselves in your capable hands, Jane.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay. Everyone happy that we leave it then and move on? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to pick up on something that Mark had. I've had my hand up for a while. And that he referred to common sense, and I think it's been very clear over the last 3 or 4 months or so that common sense is not common, and that what this needs to address is where common sense breaks down, and it's to make up the gaps and to make sure that we do have a common statement, really. Depending on who you speak to, common sense is completely different. 17-year-olds is different from a 45-year-old, is different from an 80-year-old's, and so on. So,
yeah, good point.
I think common sense is a bit of a myth.
You could even call it, what is it when you have two conflicting terms like business ethics? Oxymoron. Okay, let us move on to we have some purple paper matters to consider, and I'm anxious to crack on. I'm sorry it's taking such a long time. Work programme and future meeting dates. Hope that's all right for everybody. Good. Next one is any other business. I've already spoken about our need to recognise the national award that's been made to our legal advisors. Does anyone else have any other business for the public meeting? No? Thank you. Would someone like to move then that we move into private session?
We move into private session, please, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cargill. If someone could second that.
Happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Gifford. Right. Reports containing confidential information.